Hello, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. It's Big Mike, and I want to welcome you to the very first episode of Coffee with Big Mike, the series where I sit down for a chat with some rather interesting and amazing people over a nice cup of coffee. Joining me today is Jim, the developer of Superstar Shooter 16 and the man behind JD Video Game Productions. Welcome, Jim, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Big Mike. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Oh, anytime, anytime. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, had a nice Sunday, nice and relaxing. It's been good. Nice weekend. How are things by you?
Oh, things are going pretty good so far, though unfortunately it's Monday morning in my part of the world, so back to reality day for me. Um, now, did you get any gaming done this weekend?
Um, Game dev. Yeah. It's I played a lot of games through the pandemic. A lot of Helldivers and bit of Terraria. But it's weird. As I gotten older, I like problem solving and coding a lot more. But I still try really hard to get some gaming in. How about you? Did you play anything good over the weekend?
So, this weekend, I had the pleasure of playing an amazing game called Exo in the Starlight. It's another indie game by Superframe. Also, I played Gravity Runner by Two Dogs. Developers, and I had an amazing opportunity of checking out the beta of Beclouded by Headbang Games, and of course I definitely played Superstar Shooter 16.
Thanks, man. Oh, that's awesome. So you're getting like way into the indie scene, eh?
And that's actually a really, really interesting conversation to have, man, because this past year or this past couple of months I've kind of had like a Damascus Road type of experience when it comes to indie games. And I was never anti-indie games, but I never really played them so much, at least not to my knowledge. So every year, around August, September, the Sonic fan community holds this huge event called SAGE, Sonic Amateur Game Expo. And this year, there was a phenomenal lineup of games. And I played one game in particular called Brock the Investigator, and I was just completely blown away by it. And ever since then, I've been going head first into the indie scene.
Sweet. It's great. Yeah, I mean the kind of role that you play is super important. Like just anything to promote indie devs is absolutely enormous because it's the thing is like you have these two gargantuan challenges as an indie dev. One is like actually learning the programming, and then the other challenge after that, it's like the second mountain you have to climb is marketing your game. And it's two completely opposite skill sets, and you have to master both of them. So it's tough. I'm getting more confident with the coding, but the marketing side of things, it's still really tough. So it's awesome that there's content creators out there who want to promote indies.
And I see indies as kind of this magical land where kind of anything can happen. And I know that maybe sound a little cliche,
Yeah.
but it reminds me of how I first discovered indie film. So I love movies, like most people. Most people love a good movie. However, when I was like 16 or 17, I had the amazing experience of watching an indie film called Clerks. And it was so different. It was so unique from anything I'd seen at that time. Made on a very low budget, but one of the funniest films I'd seen. And coming into indie games, I see a similar scene. It's not a place that's dictated by, okay, we have to do this because this is going to sell. But I feel like it's a more free place where artists are more able to express their visions freely without constraints of what's going to turn a profit or how can we milk gamers for more money.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and I mean that was part of the idea with Superstar Shooter. Like it was really experimental. I was trying to do something a little different, and there's ideas from a whole bunch of different genres put together, but it's like the game is like Star Fox, but it has like audio-visual synesthesia, so things are moving to the beat of the music and flashing to the beat of the music. And it's got procedural generation, so between, being like Star Fox procedural generation and this audio-visual synesthesia, it's sort of like something new. I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. It's so weird of a thing, but I keep working at it because it's fun, it's challenging, I enjoy it. So, yeah.
And I think that's what's important. And I think that really shows in your work as well. Because honestly, unfortunately, I kind of found your game kind of late in development. We kind of met by chance one day on Twitter. And I'm really glad it happened. But doing research for not only this interview, or this conversation, I should say, but also for my episode of Indie Game Spotlight, where I'm showcasing Superstar Shooter 16, in my research, I came across some older screenshots from around early to mid 2020, and they look really different. They look vastly different. And also, when I first started playing back in September, the first part of September until now, there's been a great change. And for me, that tells me that you're, on the one hand, somebody that strives for excellence, and on the other hand, somebody that takes a great deal of pride in their work. And when it comes to art, you can definitely tell when somebody's passionate about what they're doing and when they're not. And as somebody who is a consumer of games, I definitely appreciate that.
Thanks, man. It means a lot to me. I'm glad people out there, some people are enjoying it. It's been a long road, and it's sort of a weird creative process I've gone through, because a lot of it's like, we started with these ideas, but then I just keep seeing there's all kinds of different ways to elaborate, right, and just continuously improve it and make it better. So that's what I'm striving for. I think I want to keep at it with this project for a couple more years, probably. What I'm saying for now, and I'm working at it part-time. Got a job, so it's Saturdays and Sundays kind of try to do some programming, but yeah, that means a lot to me, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, anytime. Now, before I guess we move too heavy into talking about the game development and also Superstar 16, I want to ask you just to kind of get to know you, a Jim the gamer. What was the first game you ever played?
Ooh, first one I can remember was Nintendo NES system, Super Mario Brothers, like Part 1. I remember my older brothers showing me how to play it when I was like probably 4 or 5 years old.
Actually, me
How
too.
about you? What was the first one for you?
Actually, the very first game I've ever played was Super Mario Bros. As well, on my parents' NES. Now, well, to be fair, it was one of those duo carts with Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. So I can't be 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure it was Super Mario Bros. And now, what about your favorite game? What's your favorite game?
Yeah, I got asked that a week or two ago. It's changed over the years. The three that stand out to me, if I had to pick like absolute number one, Skyrim, and then number two is probably Final Fantasy VII. Number three, Final Fantasy VI. But yeah, there's been lots of good ones. How about you?
Now, that's a very good question. That's a bit like asking which child is my favorite. If I had children, that is. If I had children. Well, I would say definitely number one would be Sonic 3 and Knuckles. That was the first game I ever completed. And also, I probably have literally beat that game thousands of times. I love the layout, I love the story, and I really love the music. It's a really interesting experience for me. If I had to pick number two, I would probably say probably any one of the first three Super Smash Bros. Games. And Donkey Kong Country 2 would be a very close third.
Was that on Super Nintendo?
Donkey Kong Country 2 was on Super Nintendo.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I played the first one, and it was really really good. Yeah, I gotta go check out the second one. That's cool.
And just in my opinion, the layout's great, the gameplay is great, but the soundtrack is phenomenal.
Hmm.
Now, now, can I ask, was there ever a game that you played, and after you played it, you're like, man, I want to make games?
This is. I have a good answer for this. It's probably less exciting than you'd expect, but I went back to university second time. I took computer science, and one of my buddies, I was in, I think it was a software design class, and we had to get into groups and all of that. So I met one of my friends there, his close friend now, and he busted out his laptop during one of our meetings and showed me this RPG he is making in Game Maker. And he's a really smart guy, but I saw and like, if he can do this, I had in my head like, if he can do this, I can do this. So that was kind of my big aha moment. Like, I'm learning programming. I can see my friend can do this. He's kind of explaining how he does things, and it's like, okay, I should probably give this a try if I absolutely, if I find the time to make a game, and I managed to find some time. So yeah.
You know, and I think I had a very similar experience with game development as well. Even though I haven't published a game yet, I saw I had a really interesting experience. I'm really into visual novels, and so I played a great visual novel. I highly recommend if you're ever looking for one to get into the genre.
Yeah.
I'd highly recommend Clannad. Great game, very moving story, very great music. However, I was inspired to, learn Ren'Py, learn some Python, so I could, program my own game. But then it hit me, the art. To get art like this is really expensive. Then one
Hmm.
day I stumbled across an amazing visual novel called Garden Society, Kunyat, and it uses the background or or public domain pictures of a very famous manor in upstate New York, if I'm not mistaken. And it's and so to do that, it does that to cut the costs.
Right.
And that's something I realized, that some of the things I learned from filmmaking, from indie filmmaking, from low budget filmmaking, I can use those same tactics here in game development. Like, for example, if I'm making a low or no budget game, I'm going to apply the same principles as if I'm making a low or no budget film. So I'm going to take stock of whatever I have or whatever I can use freely, and whatever story I'm going to make, I'm going to craft it around that. And so I haven't made anything yet. I'm planning on participating in a game jam coming up soon, but unfortunately, nothing yet. Um,
That sounds cool though. So it would be like a visual novel, except you'd be using kind of real world photographs.
so that's how that one visual novelist approached it, and I was thinking about doing the same way because
Yeah.
I'm sorry, doing the same thing because I'm also very much into amateur photography with a focus on scenery and landscapes. That's what I really love doing, and so I think it coincides rather nicely. And there's also a lot of public domain and also royalty-free images out there as well.
Cool. Yeah, you gotta be kind of thrifty, kind of looking for opportunities anywhere you can with the game dev stuff. I've bought lots of like reusable assets kind of things off like the Unity store and that. So there's all kinds of great just sort of depots, like you were saying, where you can get royalty free assets for your projects, and yeah, that'll save you a ton of money. So yeah, that's a really smart strategy.
Now, I want to ask, how did you get into game development?
Oh, yeah. Well, bit of a bit of a bummer story, but I had a pretty cool job and lost it. And I was okay because I was kind of in school and not the end of the world. And then COVID came down, and yeah, I was like, I was looking around for professional work, and I kind of realized like I wasn't gonna find anything when COVID started. So yeah, figured I'd tackle Unity and see how it went. I just kind of looked at things like with the pandemic, it's like I'm not gonna get to see my friends for who knows, right? Between 6 months and 2 years, and I'm not going to get to work a job more than likely because the economy's down, and it's like, so what am I going to do to make things bearable? So this had been a dream of mine for a long time, and I finally had the time to do it. So I figured go for it, and I was really happy with it in the end. Made me really happy, and found another job eventually and finished school and all of that. So it all worked out okay.
And I love hearing it. I love how you take this bad situation, losing your job, being stuck at home because of the pandemic, and you utilize that to bring something so amazing to life as this amazing game you have.
Yeah.
No.
How about you? How did you? I guess you kind of told me, because it was that Clannad game got you to start making games.
So that was really my first foray into it. Now, earlier, to be fair, I did kind of mess around with Mugen a bit because I love the idea of Mugen. I found it when I was in university, and it just seemed like anything could happen in Mugen. Unfortunately, I only got to the point to where I could develop stages or levels, but I never got to the point to where I was able to program characters. Because another thing, as with the visual novels, the stage development coincided rather nicely with my, my obsession with amateur photography.
Cool.
Now, one thing I really admire about you and your work, Jim, is that you're not just an indie developer; you're a solo indie developer. And so, and again, I've never made my own full game and released it, but based on what I've done so far, that's quite an undertaking to take on by yourself. So I want to ask you, what challenges have you faced as a solo indie developer that you think maybe a bigger developer or even other indie developers with teams don't have to deal with?
Yeah, that's a really good one. I think for me, it's probably one of the problems I had was kind of, I guess, psychological. It'd be like, I would look at something like, say, sound effects or something, and I would think like, oh, I'd really love to just pass that off to someone else and just not have to think about the sound. Or even just coming up with ideas, or I would run into, there's indie dev is a ton of fun, but there's also plenty of just like tedious work that you end up having to do, and be having those thoughts like, oh, it'd be so much fun just to pass this off to someone else, and it'd be a good opportunity for them to get familiar, and it wouldn't be too hard, kind of thing. So just understanding that, like, you have to do all of the bad, boring jobs, and you also have to do things that you're not really super familiar with, like doing sound design and visual design, and even just like game design is its own challenge. How do you make games difficult enough or not too difficult, and all that whole balancing act. If I had one big takeaway from a lot of this, was kind of what we were talking about before, is just like, don't be afraid to get some pre-made assets and things like that. There's I've picked up quite a few assets, especially on the art side of things, where like, I look at like particle systems as an example. So, like smoke coming off of something, or an explosion animation when an enemy gets blown up. And those things, like, I could do it if I absolutely had to, but it would take me like a month to make that, animation of the enemy getting blown up. And to just go and buy a $50 pack where there's 100 different explosions for when enemies get blown up, I mean, it just saves you so much time and makes life so much easier. It was the same thing even with this game. I am kind of an amateur musician, and I really wanted to write my own music for this. And then I started looking on Twitter, and I found out about the chiptune scene, and I had a great artist that I met through Twitter, and he let me use all of his music. It's all free and open source. So I guess, I mean, there's people who do their own entire indie project, but I guess whatever help you can get, you should try to, even if it's just buying someone else's artwork and then putting it into your game, or making some modifications. I'm not an asset flipper, as they call it, but I buy assets and then I modify them. So it's a good way to do things.
And despite the challenges that you faced, as somebody who's made a film before, and somebody who's also made other works of art, I know there's a certain sense of satisfaction that comes from knowing this all came from me. I put my blood and my sweat and my tears into making this, into bringing my vision to life. So with this in mind, if you could go back in time and do it all over again, and you had the option of having a team to help you, would you choose that option, or would you choose to be a solo developer again?
Oh, wow. That's, the best answer I can give you is I like both. In my day job, I'm actually a project manager, and it's so wonderful because the thing is, I mean, I'm never going to be an amazing visual artist. I mean, I did what I did here, but the things like designing particle systems and 3D models and all of that, there's people who are so much more talented at that than I am. And even like things like music, there's people who are just so much more talented. And it's really wonderful when you can pass things off to people. At the same time, the absolute beauty of just being a solo dev is you get to do whatever you want. You don't have to ask anyone for permission or approvals, or there's no someone else has to think about this decision and you have to wait a week on them or anything like that, which those kind of dynamics come up in a team environment. So doing things on your own has some great benefits. You can just accomplish things. You can just motor ahead. If there's something you really feel needs to be fixed, you just do it. You don't have to ask permission or anything like that. But working with people is a ton of fun too. It can be really rewarding. How about you? What's your thoughts on that? That's a great question.
That is a wonderful question. That is an absolutely wonderful question. Now, for me, I do love the fact that I can make something myself. I can put my hard work into it, my dedication, and it'll be all mine. Though also, I do realize there are certain things like film, for example, that I can't go by myself. As an okayest actor as I like to think I am, there's no way I could ever do a one-man show, for example. And there's no way I could work the film, and there's no way, the camera, and there's no way I could, play the music. Out of all the artistic talents that exist in the world, music is definitely not my forte. If there was a word that meant the opposite of forte, that would be me in music right there. But also, I love the idea of succeeding with people, of solidarity, and that comes with teamwork. So there's a certain amount, just like there's a certain amount of pride and a feeling of accomplishment that comes with doing something by yourself, there's a similar feeling that you worked, with people, that you've grown to form a relationship with. As I imagine happens when, you work with a team on a game, for example. I can imagine that feeling must be absolutely wonderful to have, to share that in common. Now, and I want to ask, of all the hurdles you had to overcome, which one do you think was the most difficult?
Yeah. Um, I can remember two of my first forays into this. Just learning Unity, and these things I'm going to describe are going to seem so trivial, but I had days where I just struggled with these things. So like in Superstar Shooter, when you hit the boost button, push button A, your ship zooms forward and it makes a noise, and that noise kind of gets higher pitch and then it gets lower pitch. So I did all of that with code, and it's not a crazy effect or anything. All it is you're changing the pitch of a sound. Um, Oh, that took me like a day, and I was just obsessed with getting it right. So it was one of those like 12, 14-hour days where like, I just had my eyeballs glued to the screen trying to write the code for it. And the concept is somewhat difficult. It's in Unity, it's called writing a coroutine. And you really suffer through your first couple coroutines and then you get it. And that's kind of where I'm at now. Like I look back on it, it's such a trivial, easy problem, but I really, really struggled with it at first. The other one I remember I was going to do my first demo. It was going to be with, I think, two or three of my closest friends. And I was getting everything just polished up so I could show this thing to them and they wouldn't laugh at me. And I had brought a new ship model into the game, like the player's spaceship, and it was always coming in backwards for some reason. And I ended up realizing it was some kind of optical effect or something, and I was like, it was just that I was seeing it backwards and it wasn't actually backwards. But that was another one where like I just sat in front of the computer for like 10 hours on this just like trivial problem that I could not figure out why it wouldn't fix itself, and I couldn't stop myself from thinking about it either, and just like take a break for whatever reason. So yeah, it's good to take breaks sometimes. I think a lot of it's a learning process, and yeah, the hardest thing overall was learning Unity. But after you put your 6 months or 8 months of hard work in, then you're good at it. And I wake up some days thinking like, why doesn't absolutely everyone on the face of the earth design games? It's not that hard once you get past some of the challenges, but yeah.
And there's so much in what you just said. It kind of reminds me of myself and my own experience as well. Particularly how you said, you can't stop thinking about, what you're doing, and that's me to a T. Like whenever I'm working on a problem, I can't stop until I solve that problem. I try to go to sleep at night, it keeps me up. So I have insomnia and I have to just plug away at it. And when it comes to gaming, sometimes, especially when it comes to coding, I should say, coding for games, sometimes you just need to take a break, and come back a little later, look at it with fresh eyes. And I've learned that when working on developing my own visual novels as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah. It's super important to take breaks and even just go for a walk, stretch out, stand up, whatever. Sitting too long is really not too great. So yeah, it's good advice.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit now, and I want to kind of get into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for Superstar Shooter 16?
Yep. That's I think there's a bit of a void in the market was kind of my thinking. I thought for quite a while about like if I could make a video game, which video game would I make? And I loved Star Fox 64 on the Nintendo 64. That was one that stood out to me as probably one of the better titles on the Nintendo 64. And the Super Nintendo Star Fox was pretty good as well. And I don't understand why that genre is so underserved. Like, they just don't make a lot of games like that. And then yeah, so that was the main inspiration for me. Is like, well, I would make a game like Star Fox because I figure it would sell well because not many people are making games like that anymore for whatever reason, and they're a lot of fun. At least I think so. And then yeah, I threw in all these other crazy ideas for whatever reason, but yeah, I did. That's my answer.
You know, it's really interesting that you bring up Star Fox 64 because when I was making my video, or rather, I should say, when I was writing my script for my indie showcase of Superstar Shooter 16, when discussing about the on-rail shooter, Star Fox 64 was the game I brought up to compare it with, and I think it's a fantastic game, very intense game to play, and probably, and I would agree with your assessment that it's probably one of the better, if not one of the best, titles on the N64.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a strange console. I remember I loved the Super Nintendo so much, and I felt a little let down by the N64, and I bought a PlayStation in the end, and I bought the PlayStation like way late to its life cycle. I think it was in like year 2000 I bought a PlayStation. But the 64 like didn't have any good RPGs on it. Super Mario 64 was amazing. Zelda was amazing. The racing games were good. Diddy Kong Racing was okay. I remember Super Mario Kart 64 was awesome. But yeah, Star Fox really, really stood out to me.
And unfortunately, I never got the opportunity to play, or not to play, but to own an original PlayStation as well when I was younger. I'm not sure if you experienced this. If you experienced this when you were growing up, but when I was a kid, at least in North Carolina, where I'm from, a lot of people had what I like to call CD phobia. And so there was this fear that once a CD gets a small little scratch on it, that it's unusable. And unfortunately, my parents subscribed to that idea, and so I went with a N64. I wanted a PlayStation. I wanted a PlayStation because at the time I was starting to get into anime, and many PlayStation games had that anime aesthetic, like, for example, Wild Arms or Final Fantasy VII. And unfortunately, the N64 had maybe one or two, but it was really lacking in that regard. Now I know that's going to sound like a blasphemy, especially once my viewers get to know me and they know how big of a Nintendo fanboy I am, or at least used to be, I should say. But yeah, I really wish I had the opportunity to have played a PlayStation when I was younger. But very good console, and I think it's one of the greats that'll go down in history.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And I have a lot of experience with gaming. You know, I started with the 8-bit consoles, but I noticed on your Steam page that this game was inspired by an eclectic group of sources. Games ranging from the 16 to 32-bit era all the way to the MS-DOS gaming. Now, unfortunately, I have absolutely no experience with MS-DOS gaming. So can you tell me, are there any titles there that you would recommend me checking out?
Ooh. Trying to think back here, like some of the ones that stood out to me. So, uh, it's bad. If I wanted to give you a straightforward answer, so I remember I had a 286, and I lived out in the country. This was my dad's machine. Was the 286 computer? It's like ran at I think 17 megahertz. So computers are in gigahertz now. So for clock frequency, like it was really slow, and they had different graphics modes. So there was like CGA graphics, and it looked like it only had like 4 or 16 colors on the screen. And then we had what was a little better was EGA graphics, and it was like 16 colors. Some good MS-DOS games, one or two to like maybe try out. Still of the Jungle, I remember being okay. If you haven't played the like OG Wolfenstein, It's similar to Doom, but just to see what things were like back then, that's one to check out. Commander Keen as well. That's another one that stands out. There's a whole bunch of Commander Keen games, and yeah, they're a little more family friendly. And yeah, there was a zombie one I looked at that I remember being really good. Can't remember the name on it, but yeah, it was a weird thing because like my dad had a big box of 5.25-inch floppy disks with all kinds of burnt games or whatever copied games, right? And it was just so strange the graphic style because it was a lot worse even than like the original NES because there was like when a game only has like 16 colors, you can tell. I think the NES could do like 256 colors at a time. So I mean, you were getting the step ups with every console generation, but like the early DOS gaming had a really strange aesthetic about it. So that was part of the inspiration for doing the 16 colors. It also ended up being a fairly good design choice because I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, like with Unity. So I figured, I made materials, and materials are kind of like what gets applied to your 3D meshes to give them color. And I figured I would start by just making 16 materials, and if I, you know, did some horrendously bad thing with my materials, making a modification to only 16 of them wouldn't be too tedious. So I would get to replicate this really weird aesthetic, and it was also an okay design choice for fixing up mistakes and things like that.
One of the things I admired was the graphical output of this game, or the graphical design, I should say. And I really, I loved how you described how you achieved that, how you combined, a very limited palette with Unity's powerful 3D rendering. And
Mhm.
I just want to ask, what amount of research went into that? Or was it just more like of a trial and error
Oh,
type of thing?
yeah, you know what? I actually went on Wikipedia and I was actually surprised to learn I think it was the CGA graphics array or whatever. It's the CGA color palette was the one with 16 colors. And that shocked me, but Wikipedia says that's what it is, so I'm believing it. And I looked through there, so there's different color CGA color palettes. So it was like you had 16 colors, and you could basically program them to be whatever 16 colors you wanted. So each manufacturer did that in a little different way. And I remember looking through them, and I think it was like the Apple CGA color palette was the one that I found the most pleasing. So I kind of went with that and tweaked it a little bit. But yeah, that's how I picked out my 16 colors.
Speaking of amazing things, amazing feats that you were able to pull off with this game. Now, on the Steam page, you said Superstar Shooter 16 synchronizes the audio and visual experience. The enemies and the scenery in Superstar Shooter 16 all move to the beat of the music. This often creates a sensation of calm focus or feeling in the zone during gameplay. And this is something I have personally experienced while playing the game. And it's something I felt was really cool. But I have to ask, was this intentional?
Um, yeah. I'm obviously a person. Well, I shouldn't say obviously. I'm someone. I probably spend a little bit too much time watching YouTube and studying various things that way. So there's a video on like psychology where they talked a little bit about this synesthesia kind of thing, which is where your senses. Some people have this issue where there's I shouldn't say issue. For some people, their senses kind of combine, so maybe they can uh, feel sounds more, or when they hear music, they'll see visuals or things like that. So I love that idea. I thought that's super cool and really interesting. Kind of wondered what that would be like. And I mean, people have been making what do they call them? They call them light synths, which is basically, if you fire up a media player or whatever, it'll you'll see some visuals that go along with the sound. So it's kind of like that, but I tried to make a game out of it. So yeah, it was. I felt like I was doing a bit of a crazy experiment, but there's actually Unity tutorials where they teach you how to do these things, and you're basically um, audio is obviously made up of frequencies. Higher frequencies are kind of higher pitched, lower frequencies are lower pitched. So you'll take every second of sound, or not every second, but every 60th of a second of sound, and it gets sliced up into 8 or 9 different bands, and then that band is the average of the frequencies, and that all gets pumped through an algorithm, and the output ends up being a value between 0 and 1 that gets refreshed 60 times a second. And you can take that value between 0 and 1, and you can pump it into the rotation of a body, or you can pump it into the intensity value, the brightness value of a material, and the end result for the user is they see things that are kind of synchronized between the visual and the audio.
And I think that's a rather interesting effect. And
Yeah.
Speaking of audio, Andreas Rodin did such a fantastic job on the soundtrack. And I think one of your earlier reviewers had even said the music alone makes this game worthy of a playthrough.
Yep.
Now, and having the right music is fundamental to making any successful project, such as a game or film. So, how did you go about finding the right music? And also, how did you know it was how did you know it was right when you found it?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, it was a bit of, I guess, exploration and research and whatnot. I had at first gone to a slightly different musician, and it was kind of one of these royalty-free music sites, and he had some really good retro-sounding music. He had a couple of really solid tracks on this there, and it was a guy that was different from Andreas. And then I ended up pulling a whole bunch of like commercial poppy kind of sounding music just to fill out, because I think I had 16 levels at first and I bumped it up to 32, so each level has its own track randomly selected. And I kind of had the game kind of had a weird feel. Like it worked, but there were some tracks that really just didn't fit in. So I got into this thing of like, well, it's kind of a retro inspired game. So what would be really cool would be if I could use what's called chiptune. So chiptune was what the old systems used, like the Sega Genesis or the Nintendo, the NES. So I've heard that this is still a popular genre. There's still people composing in this space. So I looked around on YouTube. I found a few videos talking about kind of where these people could be found. I started searching on Twitter, and Andreas was actually the first guy who wrote me. And I started listening to his tracks and chatting with him on Twitter. And it was kind of one of those, I guess, really good fortune for both of us, because I guess it helps promote him a bit, and I've made a few donations to him because I really appreciate him letting me use his music. But he's completely free and open source with everything he does, so anyone could use his tunes if they wanted to. But yeah, it matched really well. The one thing I guess I would say is with the audio visual synchronization, I think a lot of music could have worked, but I'm really happy to have used Andreas. One of the other things that's really beautiful with his music is these chiptune files. A lot of them are extremely low file size, so there'll be a few kilobytes for a song. And what that means potentially is that your game could load quite a bit faster. So I remember I was using, I think they were WAV files before, and my game would take about 5 to 10 seconds to load. And with these chiptune files, it's like everything's instantaneous. There is no loading, so that's kind of nice too.
I would say with the music, one of the things I really loved about the music was the nostalgia it brought back. Well, I guess not just the music, but also, the sounds. The sounds of who I'm presuming is the main antagonist taunting you throughout playing. It brought back so many wonderful, wonderful experiences from my arcade days. Now, I told you my first game was Super Mario Bros. But my parents, being teenagers in the 80s, they really loved visiting arcades. And so I got a chance to experience many of these classic arcade games. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me. And in some of these older arcade games, they would sometimes taunt you. Like, you're not good enough. You think you can beat me? Ha 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 ha. And that's kind of what I got here. Like, one time, it sounds like, he's taunting you by saying, I assure you there is nothing artificial about my intelligence. And I was like, oh, wow, man, this is something special here. This is really something special.
Yeah, I had to think a while to come up with some of those lines, but yeah, Andreas helped me with that as well. So even the taunting voice there, that's got a retro piece of history behind it. So Commodore 64 had a program. It was called SAM, so it was Software Automatic Mouth, and you could, I guess, type things into the keyboard and get these really weird robot voice sounds coming out of it. So that's the story behind that one. I did my best to write the script. I want to add more to that, but it's all everything in time, I guess.
And what did you love the most about working on Superstar Shooter 16?
I think it's been I guess I could tell you a surprise for me. One big surprise for me was there's a aspect of Unity that's called shader graph, and what shader graph is you're kind of it's a visual scripting tool, so it's not hard coding or anything. But with shader graph, you're creating shaders, and the shaders are basically what controls the way things look when they're applied to meshes. So you use shaders to create materials type of thing. And it's pretty mathematical, but it's also visual scripting, so it's not super hard. And I didn't think I'd be as into it as I would. I ended up getting with that, and getting some of these things like you'd probably notice when the enemies are too close to the camera, they'll turn kind of transparent so you can see through them. So coming up with some of those effects was probably a highlight for me. I really enjoyed that. The other thing, I guess, which I should say is just doing a game with procedural generation is, in my mind anyways, it's like a really abstract way of thinking. And there's kind of it's going to be a surprise sort of what's going to come out of the game. You never know. Sometimes, I would warn, like with Superstar Shooter, if you play the game and you end up with level 1 and you have a 4-minute song or something, it's not going to be super exciting, but it can be kind of cool if you end up with a longer song later on in the game, or just the way things can turn out sometimes. And with the random samples that come out of the voice there, that can make things really interesting too. So yeah, just a lot of the crazy randomness and fun writing procedural generation.
And I would say that's a very interesting aspect to have with the game, because everything is randomly generated. Every time you play it, it's going to be a different experience, different music, different layout, different enemies. And so I think that will add a great deal, or that does add a great deal of replayability to it. Now,
yeah, I hope so. I still, because I've played the thing so much, I want to keep adding more into it. It's like I wish there were more enemies in it, and Wish there was more stuff, but it's all in time.
So now, as I'm sure you're much more aware of than I am, so I don't want to feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. But, making a game, going from conception through development to having a game that's complete is no easy feat. So I want to ask, throughout this experience, have you learned anything about yourself?
Oh, what have I learned about myself? That's a tough one. I think I guess if I wanted to give like a happy answer to that, it's really nice. Actually, you know what? There is something I learned about myself that's important. In life, or maybe this is in my life, you go through this process, right? You're in school, and your teachers are basically telling you what to do. You go to work, someone's basically telling you what to do. You don't really have to think for yourself. Everything's just kind of laid out for you. There's going to be things that are going to drive you. You're obviously going to have to go to the grocery store and buy food, and you're going to have to, cook dinner every night and do your laundry and make your bed and all of that stuff. And it's all just kind of laid out for you. It's really obvious what you have to do in life. But I think when you start your own project, like making a video game, you're entirely on your own. That direction isn't there. You don't have a boss telling you what you need to do, and it can be, for me, anyways. It's pretty hard to like think for myself for quite a while, but and not have anyone giving me even a general direction to work in. But becoming more comfortable with that has been very rewarding, and I think good for my confidence.
You know, I know I'm not a game developer, or at least not yet, but I've had a very similar experience with this whole YouTuber, VTuber thing. I lived my life day in, day out, waking up, going to work, working until I'm exhausted, then going back home, or going home and going to sleep. Um, now, but now, since I started this project back in August, I felt like I've taken control back over my life. That I'm once again, I can call the shots, and honestly, it makes me feel like I'm alive, for lack of a better term. I know that sounds very cliche, but the adrenaline rush, the pumping, when things are going great, your heart pumping, it feels really good. And much like yourself with the game development, there's really very few people I can call on to help me. Now, fortunately, I've met some really great people. I can kind of say, hey, how can I do this? Or can you give me some advice? But for the most part, it's been, me versus whatever the problem I'm going up against. And I think it's shown that, I'm much more resilient. I'm a much better problem solver once I can actually think for myself, as opposed to just coasting through the motions like I have been for so long. No,
Cool.
and no. Superstar Shooter 16 is an early access game, but it plays like it's complete. So what's left for Superstar Shooter 16?
Yeah. I have the roadmap that keeps getting longer and longer. I'll pull it out. I got one or two like really big ambitious things that I want to get in there over probably the next couple years. One is to have some boss fights in there. That would be very rewarding for me. I'd be really happy if that was part of the game. The other thing, and I'm still trying to conceive how this would go, but you've noticed the game, you go straight through the entire game, right? The whole thing is a straight tube that you fly through. So I would love to figure out how to get some like twists and turns and drops and spots where you go up a little bit more, things like that. So yeah, that's big in there. And if there's some less exciting stuff like just refactoring some code, cleaning things up a little bit. And I've seen a few really cool art assets on the Unity store that I want to incorporate into the game. And I'm in the Xbox Creators Program. It's kind of like their program for indie devs. So I want to get it on the Xbox One. We'll see how that whole process goes. But that's on the roadmap too. And yeah, just I really want to get a lot more enemies and obstacles into the game.
And what does the future look like for JD Video Game Productions? Are there any projects you want to work on in the future?
The only one I got in the back of my mind, it's been bothering me. I was telling you my friend there. He showed me his RPG that he made in Game Maker, so he's learning Unity now too. And we've been talking about making an RPG game together, pixel art. And it's he's laying the groundwork for that thing, and I'm supposed to be helping him, and I keep neglecting it. But it's all cool. I see him a couple times a month for tabletop RPG night and whatnot. So it's cool. But yeah, that one's in the future. I think there's going to be a pixel art RPG. But yeah, and I'm back at work, so things are a tad slower, but I think Superstar Shooter 16 is going to be the main thing for me for a while.
What advice could you offer a developer working on their first game?
Oh. Watch lots of tutorials. Be really open-minded. Try really hard to set your code up in a way that's going to be scalable. That, when you make things, they aren't necessarily just one-offs, right? So I guess an example of this is like you're going to have enemies in your game, right? You want to make the process of creating enemies kind of reproducible and fairly easy, so that maybe it's super hard for you to create that first enemy because you're laying out a framework for creating enemies. But after that, the second, the third, the fourth, the 10th, the 20th enemy you make, you can just crank them out fairly easily. And it would be a similar kind of thing with items and all those other things where you don't want to have 2 items or something. You want like 20 items. So figure out how to make it easy for yourself to make items and to scale up your project. And a little bit of effort into performance. I like obsess over performance. I want things to run smoothly on a wide range of systems, but yeah, like Unity has a really good profiling tool, so you can see if you've coded something poorly. It'll give you some indications. You'll see a spike where it's very clear that you're utilizing too much CPU or GPU resources. So yeah, a bit of profiling and optimization is good.
And I think that's some very solid advice. That is some very sound advice, and one piece of advice that I think would make most developers' life easy, if not all. Now, the last question I want to ask you. Now, if there's a gamer out there who has never knowingly played an indie game because they don't see anything indie in a good light, or maybe because they simply don't know indie games exist, what's one thing you would like them to know?
Oh. Mm-hmm. I think there's a spectrum of I guess indie products. You can go from like a guy like me where it's solo dev, and you could go to I don't know if you've ever heard of like games like Bastion super giant games where, I mean, I'm sure that company's 20, 30 people and they're still considered indie. So someone who doesn't like anything indie, yeah, that's a tough nut to crack. I would say just go try something. Even a game like Bastion, just go try that because it's a really really good game, and I think it's very competitive with anything that the AAA studios do. So yeah, I mean, even just to try out some of the top ones, like I remember Super Meat Boy was really big back in the day. Like, yeah, go try that one. I downloaded Super Meat Boy. It was a ton of fun. Really good game. So yeah, I think it's a totally viable space, and it exists for a lot of people too. Because I don't know that a big studio like Bethesda is gonna make a 16 color game or a really heavily retro themed game. So I have no beef with the big studios. Obviously, I kind of mentioned earlier that my favorite game is Skyrim. So that's made by a big studio. I love that kind of stuff too. So but yeah, indie's a lot of fun, and it's a ton of fun being an indie. It's great if anyone can support indies because it's a tough lifestyle, but at the same time, I did this indie game, and I ended up working at kind of a digital media type company. So it was actually a pretty good investment in my time in the end.
And I would say one of the things I really like about indie games in regards to graphics is that you can find anything. You can find literally anything, from something that mimics the arcade games of the 1980s. Like there's a really fantastic game I played called Annalyn, and which is kind of like the creator takes a lot of inspiration from many different games like Dig Dug, from Donkey Kong Jr. It kind of mixes it all together to form this really great experience. On the other hand, you have graphically impressive games such as Superstar Shooter 16 or Exo into Starlight. And that's what I really love about that. And I think a lot of people would be really surprised to find out a lot of the viral games over the past 10 years or so have been indie games. Like, for example, Untitled Goose Game, an indie game. Doki Doki Literature Club, an indie game. Slender, the 8 Pages, an indie game. So I think, but I just don't think a lot of people realize that these games are indie, at least not on the surface. But I think there's a lot to learn there. But also I think that there's a lot of growth, and I think because of the internet and now with Steam, I think indie games are becoming more accessible, and the awareness of those games are becoming more widespread.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a great community, I think, around all aspects of indie games. Like even if you're just starting out, there's all those there's a great community of Screenshot Saturday people and Wishlist Wednesday people and all of that, which includes yourself, and that's so helpful. So yeah, it's cool. It's really neat. It's awesome that this whole kind of culture video game movement has emerged. I'm super happy to be part of it, and I'm really glad you are too.
And honestly, I have you to thank for a lot of that, man. Like, I had no idea what Screenshot Saturday was. I had no idea what Wishlist Wednesday was until you told me about that. So, in a large part, a great deal of my success is because of you. I've met so many wonderful people in the indie community, all because of that piece of advice you gave me. And I really, really appreciate that, man. You really have no idea how grateful I am.
It's great, and I'm happy to see you promoting other people. And yeah, it's awesome, a lot of the culture we have, because you'll see in the indie Twitter space, everyone is saying it's kind of pass it forward, pass it along. If you see someone that you can help them out. So it's really good, positive vibes.
And that's one of the things I really love about it. It's more like let's succeed together as opposed to let's tear each other down. And I believe one of the things I really believe in, and I'm not saying I'm successful at all. I still have a long ways to go on my journey, but I believe that this belief in solidarity. I can't succeed on my own. My success means nothing if you also aren't succeeding. I attribute where I'm at today to that mindset, and that's one of the things I kind of picked up from the indie community. And also, you guys, have been wonderful supporters of me, and I definitely wouldn't be here without you guys. No, sorry.
I was just agreeing. Yeah, that's great.
No, do you have any questions for me or anything you'd like to add?
Sure. What was your inspiration for becoming a VTuber?
Now, that's a very interesting question. Very, very interesting question. So, well, in real life, I'm a teacher. I teach English as a second language to adults, and as a result, I can't really show my face because I don't want to put myself in an awkward situation of not being able to express myself, and then having one of my students come up to me, like for example, hey, Mr. Michael, why were you up on Twitter at 2:30 last night, sipping over 2D girls, for example, or Michael, what do you mean when you say I'd hit that? I'm like, oh, okay. I'd be like that, so I want to avoid that. And one of the reasons why I want to be a VTuber, one of the reasons I really want to be a VTuber, I should say, is that I just want the freedom to be myself in the largest capacity possible, where I can express myself without fear of something like that happening. Now, it's not going to end my life. It's not going to ruin my day or anything like that. But it's an awkward conversation I like to avoid. It's kind of like it's kind of like, for example, when you were a teenager and you were dating, and you kind of had some personal time with your partner, and maybe their parents came in. It's a very awkward situation. You'd want to avoid, but you're doing something you love, and so it's definitely worth it if it happens. But it's something I want to avoid, if I possibly can.
Yeah, for sure. No, this the audio format's great. I think it's nice.
And honestly, I'm not sure when I'm actually going to debut as a VTuber. It's still a long ways away. But right now, because of all the success I had and with the indie community, I figured I would be kind of a fool not to jump on this and hit while the iron's hot. And so I decided to go on and not debut, but start producing content. So hopefully I can drum up some support. And so when the time comes, not much is going to change for me, really. I'm just not going to be a floating voice. When the time comes, you're going to actually see a character on the screen. But that's about it. I still plan on making the same content. Hopefully in the future, I'll stream a bit more. I'll stream some games and such. But right now, I'm going to focus mostly on making traditional YouTube content. And maybe I might do some smaller streams with like some older NES games, or maybe jump on Duolingo and try to work on my language skills a bit.
Cool. Right on, man. Okay, well, thank you so much for the interview. I'm really appreciative. So it's been great.
Oh, you're more than welcome, man. You are absolutely more than welcome. And anytime you want to come back on, please let me know. Like when you finally finish, when you're ready to move outside of the early access, I would love to have you back on again.
Oh yeah, that's cool. That's a cool idea.
But I want to thank you so much for all of your support, everything you've done for me, and for joining us today. And also, on behalf of the Linux community, thank you for making a Linux version of your game. We really love it when developers support us by making their games playable on our operating systems. Yeah.
And that was fairly easy to do. It's fairly painless to get it onto Linux. So yeah, just had to click a few buttons to export it. So yeah, it's my pleasure to do that.
Alright guys, gals, and non-binary pals, thank you so much for joining us as well. Be sure to check out Superstar Shooter 16 at the link below. And if you can't buy it but would still like to support Jim, be sure to wishlist it. Wishlisting games are a great way to support indie developers. Also, special thank you to Fran, who does a wonderful job doing my art. A special thank you to all of my friends on Twitter. I wouldn't be here without you all. And most importantly, a special thank you to all of you for watching. Please like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you dislike it. Feel free to comment below and let me know what you think. If you like my content, please subscribe and turn on your notifications. Until next time, fam, peace out.